Have you had clients who are experiencing incontinence post C-section? In today's podcast, I share about one of my clients who had 3 C-sections and is now experiencing incontinence. Listen in to hear what I found. Hello, friends. This is Lynn Schulte, and you are listening to the Birth Healing Summit podcast. We are here for meaningful conversations that will transform the way you work with pregnant and postpartum clients. Whether it is a new perspective, tool, or technique, you'll be able to implement it into your practice today. I invite you to sit back, listen with an open mind, and grab the golden nugget today's guest has to offer. Now let's get started. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode. Today, I want to talk to you about a case study that I just recently saw. A new client came into the clinic to see me this week, and it was just so interesting that I wanted to share it with you all. So this client came to me. She's had 3 C-sections. Her kiddos are 11, 9, and 6 years old. So it's been 6 years since her last C-section. During the birth, so the first 2 pregnancies, labors, she did go into labor, but wasn't able to fully, no, she got to 10 centimeters, but wasn't able to get the babies out. So the first 2 births ended up in cesarean births or in a cesarean section. And then the third one, she just opted to go ahead and have the cesarean for the third labor. And she reported that when the surgeon opened her up, there was a ton of adhesions on the abdominal wall. So the uterus was adhered to the abdominal wall. And so they cleared out all the adhesions and then they put mesh in. And her complaints when she came to see me is leakage of bladder. And she wasn't quite clear on when the leakage was happening. She was thinking more with just like movements, like getting up to stand or moving. She wasn't aware enough to know if it was with laughing, coughing, sneezing, things like that. So that was her homework, to check in with that, to become more aware of when is the leaking actually happening. And then her other complaint that she wanted help with is that she tries using a menstrual cup and she says it just leaks. It's not catching the blood. And she also sometimes has a hard time removing the cup because it gets stuck way up inside of her. So she needed to go in and get support or I think she needed to get her husband to help her to remove the menstrual cup a couple of times. So she's just really curious about what's going on with that. So I went ahead and did my assessment, and I found her sacrum more stuck in extension and not so much flexion, which makes sense with the babies not being able to come through, but they got into the pelvis. So worked a little bit on the S1-2 mobility, and then abdominally, her uterus, her C-section scar had pretty good mobility on the more superficial layers. But when I got down to the organ layers and trying to move uterus, it was restricted on the left side, and the fundus just didn't want to move to the right side. But I was able to release some stuff, and then I was able to really feel the mesh below the C-section scar and towards the pubic bone, and that was really restricted as well. So I got more mobility in there in the mesh. Then I went internally, and when I first assessed internally, the cervix was poking right into the bladder, but it easily moved backwards with just a little bit of help. So it didn't feel like it was being held there, but that's where I found it initially. Then when I went to assess it, the cervix had decreased mobility to the left, and there was definitely some thick ligamentous tissue on the left-hand side from the restriction in those ligaments. So I was thinking it was a little bit of cardinal, but also uterosacral ligaments were tight on that left side. I worked on releasing that as best I could using my external hand on the fundus of the belly, and I got it good, but not all the way there. There was still some tension in that ligament that I noticed. Um, but then I Her pelvic floor muscles, she definitely had right-sided tension in her pelvic floor muscles. And another interesting fact, she talked about she likes to sit what she calls cheerleading pose of seated, where your legs are bent over to one side. So the front leg is just bent off to the right-hand side, and the other legs are kind of internally rotated and off to the side. And she was saying that she can do that easily to the right, but she can't do it to the left at all. She's like, I fall over. And we worked on releasing her pelvic floor muscles on that right side, and they let go beautifully. And when I got done with supine, her cervix was in midline. It had good mobility, and the fundus felt like it had good mobility as well in supine. So I said, I really want to check you out in standing. Let's see what happens when you stand up. So I get her in standing and I check her out, and her cervix is tucked next to, almost like surrounded by her bladder. It was the cervix, like as you go in, usually you follow the urethra and then hit the bladder and then you hit the cervix. Well, the bladder was kind of creating this, how to best describe, almost a pocket that the cervix was being kind of, it was like a pillow. The cervix was laying its head in the pillow of the bladder. And when I went to insert my finger, all I could feel was the bladder tissue. I actually had to kind of scoop underneath the bladder to get to the actual cervix itself. And so I was like, oh, no wonder the cups, the Diva cups, the all she's tried all of them. No wonder they can't reach the cervix, and no wonder they get sucked up all the way, because there's no cervix to stop it. The cup can't get around the cervix because it is completely pushed into the bladder. And my sense was that with the standing up, and if the fundus is adhered to the abdominal wall, it's pulling that cervix into the bladder. So I told her that, we got a little bit more mobility in there, but I was not able to release that cervix or the fundus away from the abdominal wall. And I think that's really what's pulling the cervix to be into the bladder. So I'm like, I don't try the cervix until we can get that cervix in the midline, and the cup would be able to wrap all the way around it to catch the blood flow. And so I told her that's not an option right now. After our session, she got down on the ground and she was able to do the cheerleader pose to both directions, and she was very surprised by that. I'm curious if that habit and that tightness on the left side of her pelvic floor muscles might have been what has stopped both the first two babies from being able to come on out. We'll never know. But that just tells me the importance of helping our pregnant clients to understand that the habits that they do can cause problems when it comes to birth, especially if they're doing that habit over and over and over and again. So that was really interesting. So I tried to treat her in standing to see if I could try to get the cervix to go backwards and try to manipulate the fundus on the abdominal wall. And I actually had her get into inversion and see if inversion would change anything, and it didn't. I'm curious to see how this one session changes her incontinence at all. And I'm getting really curious about maybe other ways, other positions that I might be able to work with her cervix and fundus at the same time. I'm thinking side lying, or maybe even prone, or in inversion, to see if we can make any effective change. What really needs to happen, though, is that the fundus needs to get some space away from the abdominal wall. And so we're going to just have to keep playing with this to see what kind of release work we can get for these tissues. So you'll have to stay tuned. I'll let you know, hopefully. And Yeah, it was a very, very interesting case. And I'm just so bummed that, she's here 6 years after the third C-section, and what we could have done possibly to avoid this from happening in the first place had she had gotten some care right after the healing had happened, and we started working on that scar tissue and hopefully prevented the adhesion from happening in the first place. So, yeah, very, very interesting case that I just wanted to share with you. And the takeaway for me with this case, for you all listening, is it's so important for us to assess not only in supine, but in standing. Because when gravity hits the picture, it can totally change the cervical position, the fundus position, how it impacts with the pelvic floor muscles, with the bladder. All of that needs to be assessed. And we may want to do a standing assessment and then a supine assessment or vice versa, but please don't shy away from really assessing to see what's happening with the uterus in standing. And then you take your knowledge of anatomy and what's happening in there and try to, either treat in standing or take that back to a supine or maybe even side lying position and see if there's a way to work with what's happening with that organ in there and its positioning in there. Okay. So hope that was interesting for you. I found it interesting to assess this and to work with these tissues and see, and I'll look forward to hearing what happens for her the next time I get to see her. So thanks for listening in. If you're interested in learning about how to work with the cervix and the uterus, the fundus of the uterus externally, the cervix internally, I teach all that in the holistic treatment of the postpartum body course. And we have a cohort starting in September. So please check that out and join me if you haven't already taken that the holistic postpartum course with me. All right. Thanks everybody for listening in, and we will see you all on the next episode. Take care. Here's to smoother births and faster recoveries. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye. Today's podcast was brought to you by the Institute for Birth Healing. To discover more, visit instituteforbirthhealing.com. To claim $50 off of any online course, use coupon code podcast50 at checkout. Till next time, I'm Lynn Schulte, founder of the Institute for Birth Healing.